Hello, sophomores. Sorry for getting this video out a little later than the last one. That's the bad news. The good news is, well, I guess there's still bad news. Bad news is I thought Act 3 was a single scene. Good news is, because it's two scenes, I want to crank out over 3 days so we have some time to actually break down what's going on, because I realized my last video ran a little long, and I want to be respectful of, yes, Pico, you told me that's true, and I'm telling them now. So anyways, I realized that went long, but I want to respect your time and make sure that this is still a manageable thing to be able to get through. So we'll probably go up to around line 180 in Act 3, Scene 2, and then kind of work from there for Wednesday. But we won't finish Act 3 today, for better or for worse. So same drill as yesterday. I'm going to be playing and then stopping the audiobook at regular intervals, and letting you know by circling on the page and reading along what's kind of happening in the text from my point of view. And then I plan to, by the end of the week, have some sort of public discussion or poll or video chat, something like that, that we can all kind of do together to feel a bit more like it's a class. So I will get started. We're picking right up on line 180, or I guess 181 of Act 3, Scene 1.
Hail, mortal!
Hail!
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 I cry your worship's mercy heartily. I beseech your worship's name.
Cobweb!
I shall desire you of more acquaintance, good Master Cobweb. If I cut my finger, I shall make bold with you.
Okay, so not a lot to say here other than that Bottom is going to make little jokes about each fairy's name. Cobweb, I guess it was common around 1600 to use cobwebs, is what today we'd probably use Band-Aids for. He's going to do the same kind of version of that joke with everybody else. Mustard seed, he's going to say, I have had my eyes water by eating too much of you. I don't find them all that funny, and frankly, the fairies probably don't either, but it's just a series of jokes on their name. And I think the biggest thing to note is that Titania has recruited kind of her whole fairy squad at this point to kind of do Bottom's bidding in an effort to woo him, as though Bottom were really needed to be won over.
Your name, honest gentleman?
Peace Blossom!
I pray you, commend me to Mistress Squash, your mother, and a Master Peascod, your father. Good Master Peace Blossom, I shall desire you of more acquaintance too. Your name, I beseech you, sir.
Mustard Seed.
Good Master Mustard Seed, I know your patience well. That same cowardly giant-like ox beef hath devoured many a gentleman of your house. I promise you, your kindred had made my eyes water ere now. I desire your more acquaintance, good Master Mustard Seed.
Come, wait upon him, lead him to my bower. The moon, methinks, looks with a watery eye, and when she weeps, weeps every little flower, lamenting some enforced chastity. Tie up my love's tongue, bring him silently.
Okay, and so that's the end of this scene here. Again, I think Titania's parting words are a little disturbing. Tie up my lover's tongue, bring him silently. Another thing that, because I've just been doing a little reading about the play with, the time I've been spending at home, I've read that it's common for when people produce this, and even common in Shakespeare's time, to have these four fairies come from Snug, Starveling, Snout, and, I'm missing one of them, maybe Flute, the actors, but they were meant to be doubled. But then at the same time, I also read that there was a famous production of Midsummer Night's Dream by the Royal Shakespeare Company in the 1970s in London, and I read that they had adult men play the fairies, and that was considered kind of radical and frankly kind of disturbing. So, take that for what it's worth, that actors were supposed to double this. At the same time, it seemed like if that happened in the 70s, people thought that was kind of a new and somewhat distressing way to produce this play. Anyways, we'll start with Act 3, Scene 2 here right away.
Exeunt. Scene 2. Another part of the wood. Enter Oberon.
I wonder if Titania be awaked. Then what it was that next came in her eye, which she must dote on in extremity.
Enter Puck.
Here comes my messenger. How now, mad spirit? What night rule now about this haunted grove?
One thing to note here is that in Oberon's comments, we see an element of sadism, really sitting around and hoping that things went as bad for Titania as possible with this situation of falling in love with something else. And we talked a bit in class about how it's not just a personal fight at this point, it's probably to humiliate or weaken the credibility of Titania in the fairy kingdom, but really kind of depraved that since he sent Puck out to make her fall in love with some beast, he's just been sitting and kind of rubbing his hands and talking about how great it will be if this kind of destroys her sense of self. So an equally disturbing character. If Titania's kind of using these somewhat violent, somewhat malicious thoughts against Bottom, Oberon's privately doing the same thing against Titania.
My mistress with a monster is in love. Near to her close and consecrated bower, while she was in her dull and sleeping hour, a crew of patches, rude mechanicals that work for bread upon Athenian stalls, were met together to rehearse a play intended for great Theseus's nuptial day. The shallowest thickskin of that barren sort, who Pyramus presented, in their sport forsook his scene, and entered in a break. When I did him at this advantage take, an ass's knoll I fixed on his head.
Okay, and if there was any sort of question whether or not we were supposed to see Bottom as an idiot, Puck here describes him as the shallowest thick skin of that barren sort. So even among these actors who are idiots, Bottom stands out for his idiocy. And again, I think, being insulted by Puck probably means something. So something that the audience can kind of laugh at with that description there.
Anon his Thisbe must be answered, and forth my mimic comes. When they him spy, as wild geese that the creeping fowler eye, or russet pated troughs, many in sort, rising and cawing at the gun's report, sever themselves and madly sweep the sky, so at his sight away his fellows fly. And at our stamp, here o'er and o'er one falls, he murder cries, and help from Athens calls. Their sense thus weak, lost with their fears thus strong, made senseless things begin to do them wrong, for briars and thorns at their apparel snatch, some sleeves, some hats, from yield as all things catch.
Okay, another thing to note here is that Puck is laying out what happens. So as we saw in the movie, Puck transforms into, fire, into a pig, these different things, and he's chasing them. And he's really proud of himself that the actors get so freaked out and so kind of befuddled that they're running into each other and they're falling all over. We get the sense again that Puck is not somebody evil, just somebody kind of who likes mischief. But then Puck goes on and he says, "Their sense thus weakens, lost with fears thus strong, made senseless things begin to do them wrong." And I think Puck is describing several characters here, that when your senses are weakened, when you're not really relying on your perceptions to make sense of the world around you, these senseless things begin to do you wrong. You start to see insults or see betrayals and things that have nothing to do with what's actually happening. And I think Puck is also, in a way, either foreshadowing or aware of what's going on at this point between Lysander, Hermia, Demetrius, and Helena. I think their sense thus weak, lost with their fears thus strong, made senseless things begin to do them wrong, would exactly describe the Athenian lovers. So Shakespeare seems to be, I think, combining the actors with the lovers at this point in Puck's description, and doing a clever job of letting him talk about multiple parts of the play while seemingly to only address one.
I led them on in this distracted fear, and left sweet Pyramus translated there, When in that moment, so it came to pass, Titania waked, and straightway loved an ass.
This falls out better than I could devise. But hast thou yet latched the Athenian's eyes with the love juice, as I did bid thee do?
I took him sleeping, that is finished too, and the Athenian woman by his side, that when he waked, of force, she must be eyed.
Okay, so it's interesting that Oberon, again, he likes hearing that Titania is going to fall in love with this idiot Bottom, but his question isn't really about that, and he doesn't take time to do a victory lap. He asks if Demetrius loves Helena yet, and in a way I think that's maybe a sign of compassion on his part. We talked about why Oberon gets involved at all. Does he sympathize with Helena? Does he feel the need to kind of make the world right because he knows he's made it wrong? We had lots of different ideas, but it's interesting that Oberon's question isn't really about, even though he started with talking about how he wanted Titania to be humiliated, his question is about whether or not I think Helena's happy, and maybe that shows a more compassionate side of him, even though he kicks off the scene kind of in villain mode, talking about how bad he hopes this goes for Titania.
Enter Hermia and Demetrius.
Stand close. This is the same Athenian.
This is the woman, but not this the man.
Oh, why rebuke you him that loves you so? Lay breath so bitter on your bitter foe.
Now I but chide, but I should use thee worse, for thou I fear hast given me cause to curse. If thou hast slain Lysander in his sleep, being o'ershoes in blood, plunge in the deep, and kill me too. The sun was not so true unto the day as he to me. Would he have stolen away from sleeping Hermia? I'll believe as soon this whole earth may be bored, and that the moon may through the centre creep, and so displease her brother's noontide with Antipodes.
Okay, so we have Hermia just kind of waxing poetic about Lysander. She seems to have changed her tune, because we know back in Act 1, Scene 1, she seems a bit skeptical of Lysander's sincerity when Lysander's talking about how much he loves her. Here she seems to have changed her tune again and is almost taking on that really dramatic, really flowery description of their love. The sun was not so true into the day as he to me. Would he have stolen away from sleeping Hermia? I'll believe as soon this whole world may be bored, and that the moon may through the center creep, and so displease her brother's noontide with the Antipodes. Bored here doesn't mean what you probably feel watching these videos. Bored means that the world is cut through, like with a drill, and so what Hermia is saying is that she's as likely to believe that Lysander got up and left her because he doesn't love her anymore, that the moon is not making its way around the world, but actually through the world because there's a hole in it nobody's noticed yet. In other words, she's saying there's no chance possible that Lysander has just decided he hasn't loved her.
It cannot be but thou hast murdered him. So should a murderer look, so dead, so grim.
So should the murdered look, and so should I, pierced through the heart with your stern cruelty. Yet you, the murderer, look as bright, as clear as yonder Venus in her glimmering sphere.
Okay, and a pretty disturbing discussion here. Hermia saying, you must have murdered Lysander, that's the only explanation for why he's not out looking for me. And Demetrius saying, gosh, that's a good idea, and I wish I had done it, but I didn't. And Demetrius flips things around. He says, yeah, you, the murderer, look as bright as clear as yonder Venus in her glimmering spear. He says that she's murdered him, Demetrius, by being cruel to him, being dismissive of him, which almost sounds like what Helena said to Demetrius. So we're getting a sense of how these characters almost recycle different speeches to different characters at different points, depending on who they're in love with at that moment.
What's this to my Lysander? Where is he? Ah, good Demetrius, wilt thou give him me?
I had rather give his carcass to my hounds.
Out, dog! Out, cur! Thou drivest me past the bounds of maiden's patience. Hast thou slain him then? Henceforth be never numbered among men. Oh, once tell true, even for my sake. Durst thou have looked upon him being awake, and hast thou killed him sleeping? Oh, brave touch! Could not a worm, an adder, do so much? An adder did it, for with doubler tongue than thine, thou serpent, never adder stung.
All right, so a lot going on in Hermia's speech here. One, we have another comparison of a person to an animal. Out dog, out cur. She's calling Demetrius a dog for what he's done. And she goes on to say, you've probably killed him, and if you've killed him, you'll never be numbered among men. Your status as a human basically will disappear because you've acted like a beast. It seems to almost be a version of Demetrius's comment to Helena that she ought to think about her self-respect in this situation, that at some point she has to go back to Athens, and if she does it without making a huge mistake, she can probably kind of be brought back into the family. But if she takes it too far, she can't do that anymore. So again, characters recycling other characters' speeches. Hermia is giving a speech to Demetrius that sounds an awful lot like Demetrius' speech that he gave to Helena when Demetrius was shunning Helena. Another thing to note is that Hermia doesn't only compare Demetrius to a dog, she also compares him to a worm, an adder, a snake. And if we think about the end of Act 2, Hermia woke up saying that she had that nightmare that there was a snake wrapped around her heart and that Lysander was standing back and laughing at her. It seems as though she's identifying that snake as Demetrius. And it seems like she gets that wrong. We know that Demetrius has not slain Lysander, so she is grossly misidentifying who's actually kind of at fault here. And I guess we could debate whether anyone's at fault, because nobody, save for, well, I guess it's just Lysander under the effects of the potion at the moment. But, I think one of the themes of the play is that love makes you do things that are borderline crazy, if not full-on crazy. And in that regard, maybe it makes, if not forgivable, all the characters' words and actions a little more understandable, that they're getting things so wrong because they just feel so much passion in these situations.
You spend your passion on a misprized mood. I am not guilty of Lysander's blood, nor is he dead for aught that I can tell.
I pray thee, tell me then that he is well.
And if I could, what should I get therefore?
A privilege never to see me more, and from thy hated presence part I so. See me no more, whether he be dead or no.
All right, another really interesting parallel here. Hermia says, look, Demetrius, tell me that Lysander's doing okay. And Demetrius says, if I could, what would I get in return for it? Even though that's really sleazy, I think it bears back to this idea that if you help somebody with their love for somebody else, maybe they'll be so appreciative that they'll start loving you, which again is out of Helena's playbook. She tells Demetrius that Lysander and Hermia are running away because she thinks that even if she helps one lover find another, she'll get something out of it in the long run. Demetrius has a lot sleazier delivery of that sort of speech, but I think it's essentially the same idea. If I can help you get with the person you think you love, will you notice me? Will you maybe start liking me? It's definitely a Helena-esque line of thinking to be using there.
Exit.
There is no following her in this fierce vein. Here, therefore, for a while I will remain. So sorrow's heaviness doth heavier grow, for debt that bankrupt sleep doth sorrow owe, which now in some slight measure it will pay, if for his tender here I make some stay.
Lies down and sleeps.
What hast thou done? Thou hast mistaken quite, and laid the love juice on some true love's sight. Of thy misprison must perforce ensue some true love turned, and not a false turned true.
Then fate o'errules that one man holding troth, a million fail, confounding oath on oath.
Okay. We have that situation again here where Oberon is frustrated with Puck, and we discussed this a bit before we left for break. Oberon just said, put the love juice on the Athenian guy's eyes. You'll know him because he's dressed in the clothes of Athens. Oberon's frustrated here, and again, I think sometimes Puck gets a bad rap as somebody intentionally out to screw things up. Puck clearly doesn't mind it if it goes that way, but Oberon's frustration with Puck seems misplaced. Puck also seems to have the same feeling about men that Hermia did back in Act 1. That if fate overrules, that one man holding true, a million fail, confounding oath on oath. That most of the time, even though one guy says he loves another girl, in this case, they're lying. And so I think Puck's trying to say, look, hang around for 10 minutes and maybe the tide will change with their feelings. Trying to, in a sense, comfort Oberon and also make light of sometimes even when we think this is, the love to end all loves, that it flames out pretty quickly.
About the wood go swifter than the wind, and Helena of Athens, look thou find. All fancy sick she is, and pale of cheer, with sighs of love that cost the fresh blood dear. By some illusion see thou bring her here, I'll charm his eyes against she do appear.
I go, look how I go, swifter than arrow from the Tartar's bow.
Another thing to note here is that whether he's responsible for the screw-up or not, Oberon's so frustrated that he says, look, I'll just do the darn chore at this point. So I think a bit of a funny part there. Oberon also goes on for a great deal of time about how sad Helena is, and maybe that's more a suggestion that Oberon truly sympathizes with her and feels bad that she's in this situation where life seems like it's not worth living anymore, like the people that she loves will never love her back, these kind of extreme passions that rejected love can bring out. He definitely kind of dwells on that, and maybe that's another suggestion that Oberon truly cares about Helena's happiness.
Exit.
Flower of this purple dye, hit with Cupid's archery, sink in apple of his eye. When his love he doth espy, let her shine as gloriously as the Venus of the sky. When thou wakest, if she be by, beg of her for remedy.
Re-enter Puck.
Captain of our fairy band, Helena is here at hand, and the youth mistook by me, pleading for a lover's fee. Shall we their fond pageant see? Lord, what fools these mortals be!
Stand aside. The noise they make will cause Demetrius to awake.
Then will two at once woo one. That must needs be sport alone, and those things do best please me that befall preposterously.
All right, so kind of Puck's motto here in lines 122, 123, and those things do best please me that befall preposterously, that when things go wrong, that's when I'm having my most fun. Puck also is standing back and I think just kind of shaking his head at what he's seeing people do when they're in love. And I think Puck kind of gets to be this fun outsider going, do people really act that way? Lord, what fools these mortals be, one of his most famous lines from the play, just kind of shaking his head at what people are doing for love. And again, I think the audience in a play like this gets that same opportunity. I think probably most people who see this play, if they're adults, have been through a situation where they've just been head over heels and crazy and willing to do anything and saying stupid things and doing stupid things and, feeling like the world has stopped when that person doesn't love them back. And then, a little time out of that, you go, was I really like that? No, nobody really acts like that when they're in love. I think Puck kind of gets to be that older version of ourselves who, laughs and kind of shakes his head. And, frankly, I think even if we're in that situation, the story of most people's lives is that they're alternating between Puck and probably one of the Athenian youth. In terms of just their emotions forever, kind of doing something stupid and then shaking their head at it, and the next chance they get to do something stupid for love, they take it.
Enter Lysander and Helena.
Why should you think that I should woo in scorn? Scorn and derision never come in tears. Look, when I vow, I weep, and vows so born, in their nativity all truth appears. How can these things in me seem scorn to you, bearing the badge of faith to prove them true?
You do advance your cunning more and more. When truth kills truth, oh devilish holy fray, these vows are Hermia's. Will you give her o'er? Weigh oath with oath, and you will nothing weigh. Your vows to her and me put in two scales will even weigh, and both as light as tails.
Okay, so we see a lot from Helena here. One, backing up for Lysander, is that he's saying, look, I'm crying, and if you can see that I'm crying, that clearly must be the truth. So again, I think appearances and extreme demonstrations of love, extreme emotions, seem to be what Lysander's trying to convince her he should believe. Ironic, especially because he said that reason brought him to this point, and since reason didn't seem to be a good enough argument, now he's kind of saying, well, I'm overwhelmed with emotion. Won't that get you over to my side? Helena obviously isn't swayed by this. She still thinks that he's being cunning, that he's making fun of her. She says that these vows are Hermia's, and in the same breath as saying that they're Hermia's, she basically says, you're a liar. You're saying the same things to me, Helena, that you said to Hermia, and they probably both mean absolutely nothing at all. So Helena, extremely frustrated with Lysander, not just because he's making fun of her, which she believes, but also because he's being disloyal to her friends, and, seemingly just saying what he needs to say to get with whoever he's attracted to at that moment, which would probably make us stand back and say, Helena, isn't that what Demetrius did to you? Didn't he change his mind, overnight about who he loved? Could we put his vows in two scales and they'll weigh even, both light as tails? But again, she'd say, well, he's a good guy. Don't make him sound like Lysander. Lysander's a jerk. So I think another funny part of love that she's holding against Lysander, what she may even find attractive about Demetrius in terms of his faults.
I had no judgment when to her I swore.
Nor none in my mind now you give her o'er.
Demetrius loves her, and he loves not you.
Oh, Helena! Goddess! Nymph! Perfect, divine! To what, my love, shall I compare thine eyne? Crystal is muddy. Oh, how ripe in show thy lips, those kissing cherries tempting grow! That pure congealed white high Taurus snow, fanned with the eastern wind, turns to a crow when thou hold'st up thy hand. Oh, let me kiss this princess of pure white, this seal of bliss.
All right, so if you're paying really close attention to the metaphors, Shakespeare uses a ton of bird metaphors, and we saw, the cuckoo one. Puck lists a huge number of birds there, or maybe that was Oberon, one of the fairies. Anyways, earlier, Lysander said, who would not exchange a raven for a dove? And he's moved on to calling Hermia a crow. So birds are constantly kind of one of Shakespeare's favorite symbols to use. He also talks about kissing cherries, her lips being as red as cherries. And it seems like he was talking about ripe until reason. The idea of fruit comes up importantly. You'll see a lot of these images repeat, and we could say, well, Shakespeare constantly talks about birds, or Shakespeare, what else ripens besides fruit? We could say that, but again, my thought is, it's that when somebody says that they love somebody else and maybe even uses a metaphor for it, we're picking from a pretty small bowl of choices, and we tend to, even if we think it's original, repeat things that have been said a million times. Doesn't make them mean less, but it probably sounds pretty repetitive at a certain point.
Oh, spite! Oh, hell! I see you all are bent to set against me for your merriment. If you were civil and knew courtesy, you would not do me this much injury. Can you not hate me, as I know you do, but you must join in souls to mock me too? If you were men as men you are in show, you would not use a gentle lady so, to vow and swear and super praise my parts, when I am sure you hate me with your hearts. You both are...
Okay. Gender comes back in this, and Helena, I think, is the one most aware of gender and the most dissatisfied with gender expectations. But she plays the idea of what a man is to her advantage here. She says, if you are men, as men you are in show, you would not use a gentle lady so. Basically saying a decent guy is somebody who doesn't, kick someone when they're down, doesn't make a girl feel worse when she's been dumped, things like that. And so we could look at it a number of ways, but an interesting one to consider is that maybe Helen's a bit opportunistic, that when gender is something that works for her, she says, well, a man should be this. But when gender is something that doesn't work for her, she says, well, why does a woman have to be this? So a variety of ways to read it, but she's clearly somebody who's constantly thinking about what it means to be a man, how we know a person is a man, what it means to be a woman, how we know a person's a woman, what it means to be a bad version of either of those things. It seems like Helen is the character who's always filtering any interaction she's having through gender.
Rivals and love Hermia, and now both rivals to mock Helena, a trim exploit, a manly enterprise, to conjure tears up in a poor maid's eyes with your derision. None of noble sort would so offend a virgin, and extort a poor soul's patience, all to make you sport.
You are unkind to Demetrius, be not so, for you love Hermia. This you know I know. And here with all good will, with all my heart, in Hermia's love, I yield you up my part, and yours of Helena to me bequeath, whom I do love, and will do till my death.
All right, so a lot here. Lysander, I think, being the epitome of irony, saying, Demetrius, you should go love Hermia. But it's interesting because Lysander, back in Act 1, Scene 1, when he's talking in front of Aegeus, in front of Theseus, says, there's something you should know about Demetrius, Aegeus. He was just in love with Helena, and now he loves your daughter. Lysander flips that. For you love Hermia, this I know you know. So, again, in Act 1, Scene 1, it was, look, I know you love Helena, and I'm going to kind of make that public here. In this scene, he's saying, I know you love Hermia, and I'm going to make that public here. So just kind of flipping that phrase again to kind of make what he wants happen, whether it makes sense at all or not.
Never did mockers waste more idle breath.
Lysander, keep thy Hermia. I will none. If e'er I loved her, all that love is gone. My heart to her but as guest-wise sojourned, and now to Helen is it home returned, there to remain.
Helen, it is not so.
Disparage not the faith thou dost not know, lest to thy peril thou abide it dear. Look where thy love comes, yonder is thy dear.
Okay. So we'll end here, but just a few notes here. One, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is the irony in Helena being upset that Demetrius is saying that he loves her. I think under any other circumstance, Helena would probably give everything she had in the world to hear that. But since it's in the situation where she feels like it's mockery, her friend Hermia and Lysander and Demetrius are all on this just to make her feel as bad as possible by kind of pranking her by saying how beautiful she is and how lovely she is. She's in a situation where she's going, Demetrius, shut up. You keep saying you love me, and it's ticking me off more each time you say that, which, again, I think is really ironic because in Act 1, Scene 1, that's all that she wanted to hear and the thing that would make her happy for the rest of her life. We also have a situation here where we have some intelligent statements about love. Lysander says to Helen, Demetrius doesn't love you. Helena, it is not so. And Demetrius makes a good point about love. He says, disparage not the faith thou dost not know. And so I think he raises a really good question. I think we're often quick to tell people, oh, you don't really love that person, or that person doesn't really love you. But at the end of the day, we don't know what they feel. And I think we're always, to a large degree, guessing and making assumptions when we make that sort of statement that people do love each other or people don't love each other. Probably the only person who's aware of whether they love another person or not is the person feeling those emotions themselves. And so even though Demetrius is being a fool in this scene, he has these moments of brilliance. He has these moments where I think he says incredibly insightful, true and mature things about love, such as it's probably a bit out of line to ever tell anybody that, they do or don't love somebody, that's such a personal and subjective and emotional state that no one can ever know, that we're always kind of talking out of turn when we tell somebody whether they actually love somebody else or not. So we'll stop there, and we will finish Act 3 tomorrow. Again, my apologies. I thought it was one scene. Turns out it's two. But we'll make it through it. Sorry for getting this video out a little late, but we have another day to work with it. So if you watch it tomorrow and then watch the end of Act 3 tomorrow, that should be no problem. Remember that we have a reading response coming up, but I'll probably kick that back a day. since we're going to talk about Act 3 for another day, and then we'll just adjust the schedule as needed as far as reading the rest of this. Have a good afternoon and evening, and I will see you tomorrow.